Hello and welcome to our weekly share on the Parsha. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Eikev, and let's start, as we normally do, with the dedications for people who we want to have a refuah shlema. So let's start with Rafael Chai Ben Sora and Oria Chaim Ben Chana Yehuda, the little boy waiting for a lung transplant. Yecheska Yehuda Ben Yenta. It's a Rivka Basim Esther, my dear wife, who is doing very well, recovering from knee transplants, and everybody else that we normally daven for. This shir should contribute for their refuah shalema. Simultaneously, I want to remind you that, consequently, perhaps, that this shir is available for dedication, and we'd like to sponsor it, $180. Then we can commemorate somebody who's passed away. We can celebrate a simcha in your life, or indeed, we can add the name of someone to our list for somebody who needs a refuah shalema. There was no share last week, although I did put a connection to a share on my Facebook page, and I'll try and get it up in the usual places here and in Torah anytime, so there wouldn't be too big a gap. A little share that I gave in London, and the reason was, obviously, I was in London. I was in the UK. I was speaking in Tisha B'Av for the Jewish Learning Exchange and for a show called Netzach in Edgware on Tisha B'Av 7 times, very enjoyable. And then I spoke, as I said, started the Torah way, which is the share which you'll find online. And on top of that, I was very, very blessed to be in Edgware speaking for a Project Seed and the show Netzach I mentioned before, speaking for them in Shabbos as well. Absolutely fabulous. And it was organized by a very, very dear old friend and one of my university students from back in the day, a fellow called Ian Mars. Friday night, we were in his house and he had lots of guests, people, friends of his, obviously. I was eating at the table. It was going to be followed by an oneg. And as an ice-breaking game, they played the idea of going around the table and everybody saying their name, where they were born. I think it was a hobby, their favorite food, and a pet peeve. It's a nice icebreaker, and it gave me a chance to know who everybody was. Ian was sitting at the top of the table, and we went round in a clockwise direction. The last one on the right, when it came round, what happened to be a fellow called Gideon Gabriel, who is also one of my ex-students. A lovely young man, and it was I felt a bit silly, or he probably felt a bit silly as well, introducing himself. Everybody there knew who he was, and of course, I knew he was because he was one of my students from, well, 26, 30 years ago, whatever it was. And so he introduced himself and he said his name was Gideon Gabriel. We were both smiling as if I didn't know. And then he was born in, no, I'm absolutely sure I remembered he was born in Richmond on Thames in South London. And he said, I was born in Mumbai. It used to be called Bombay, of course, the most populous and financial center of India, the most populous country in the world. And I was absolutely astonished. Here was something that I didn't know about him. Incidentally, if you have access to Hamodia newspaper and Indian magazine, I wrote about him in my masterpieces next week. So you'll find remarkable, interesting story. And it is so incredible that the people you think you know, and you think you know their story, you don't really know at all. So it's actually quite a good idea to play this game at your table, perhaps. Anyway, he then pointed to me and said to this day his parents have not quite fully forgiven him for causing him to go off the derech, off the D, as they say, off the derech, and embrace Torah and mitzvahs, which everybody started laughing at. And of course, that's simply not true, by the way. One of my bugbears, my pet peeves is rabbis who say, I made him frum. No rabbi made anybody frum. The person who made somebody frum is the person themselves, the he or the she who had fought the battles and sometimes lost family and friends as a consequence of their choice of lifestyle and of Torah observance. They're the true heroes. But he went on to explain, he said, I remember the first time I heard a shir from Rabbi YY. And what he said there started me on a journey, or words to that effect. And I was getting a little bit red. And then he actually recalled something that he'd heard me say in a shir in Manchester's Hill House 27 years before. And he remembered it perfectly. But the thing that astonished me wasn't the fact that he had such a good memory. The thing that astonished me is what the Dvar Torah was. The Dvar Torah, the idea which sparked a change in his life. And it was nothing from me at all. I was merely repeating the words of Rashi. What was it that affected and changed him? When Rashi points out that, so he said, Rabbi Rubinstein said in the shir, so this is just Rashi, that when Paro decided to kill the Jewish children at birth to make sure that Moshe Rabbeinu would not arrive on the planet and save the Jews, he chose the murder, the technique for murder as drowning them in the Nile. And the reason he did this, is Rashi, because he knew that God had promised never to bring another flood to the world. And as God always punishes mida keneged mida, said Gideon, measure for measure, what you do wrong, Hashem does to you, then as he's already promised not to bring another flood to the world, he's checkmated himself. Because therefore, if we drown the babies, we would have to be drowned, and he's not going to bring another flood to the world. We are safe, we are secure. He can't avenge their deaths. Rashi says what he didn't calculate on was he wouldn't bring another flood to you, but he'd bring you to a flood. And that was the Rashi. And all I did was repeat what Rashi said. But that little, I suppose, but that Rashi, that well-known Rashi, that changed his life. He said he found in that Judaism had an intellectual depth, a great depth, worth plumbing, worth exploring. And that was the beginning of a journey in his life, with his wonderful wife, Melinda, and his two little boys, and a truly loyal Torah family. It's the little things that you think, oh, it's just a Rashi. It's not just, obviously, it's not just a Rashi. But this week's Parsha Eikev, is all about little things. In Parsha Eikev, it says, and it'll be if you listen to these, normally translated as if, to these, the art scroll, which I have here, says, if you hearken, I don't know when's the last time you hearkened to anything. That's a rather old-fashioned word. Anyway, but if you, Vahoya here, Eikev is usually translated as since or if, or maybe when. When you've listened to these laws, etc., I'm sure I'll say someone, oh, you've guarded them, you've done the Oisam, so you doing that will provoke Hashem to do his part of the bargain, and then there's also some incredible blessings that flow from it. Rashi says, what's this word Eikev really mean? Which we said might mean since, because, or if you keep these things. So Rashi says the word Eikev, obviously, is another well-known Rashi that one might, ironically, bearing in mind what he's going to say, discard as being just a little Rashi. He says it's the little mitzvahs, the ones that people crush beneath their heel. Eikev is the Hebrew word for a heel. Remember, Yaakov held on to his brother Esau's heel when he was born. That's why they called him Yaakov, Eikev, Yaakov. It's got the same word in it. His name is heel, effectively. And basically, the heel is the part of the body you push down on. So therefore, it's the mitzvahs that people crush between their heel, seemingly little mitzvahs, seemingly insignificant mitzvahs. If you keep them, then all the blessings of the Torah are going to flow into place. Interesting. The little ones, the ones easily overlooked, easily discounted, are easily forgotten. And it's funny because little things is a very important concept to have in mind. Because what does a little thing mean? Well, I remember when, as I've told you about this many times in my shirim, my daughter-in-law, my oldest daughter-in-law, is the deputy head of the infertility clinic at Shari Tzedek Hostel in Yerushalayim. And when we visited her lab, my wife and I visited her lab just before COVID, we approached it looked like a flatbed scanner, or maybe a scanning machine, a printer, but it had an iPad screen on the top of it. And in the middle of this blank sort of grey screen, it's obviously a picture of something, there was a circle. And the circle was sort of wiggling and jiggling. And then that circle, that cell, this was a fertilized human cell, an ovum did this and became an 8, figure of 8 falling on the side, or the infinity symbol. And then the 8 became 2 8s on top of each other. Of course, this was the replication of the cell, the beginning of human life, of your human life, of my human life. But a cell's a very little thing. In my translation of Shar B'Tochen of the Chovos Levovos, called Refuas Lev, which now is 5th edition, I'm about to print it for the 6th edition, Baruch Hashem. It's been very warmly welcomed by the Jewish people. I wrote there in page 49 in the introduction of the Chovos Levavos. I quoted the famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman, an essay he gave in 1959 at the annual meeting of the American Physical Society in Caltech. And he said the following thing. He spoke about the increasing importance of nanotechnology, the science, of course, of manipulating matter at the atomic or molecular level. So let's think about an atom. He explained that there are 10 million nanometers in a centimeter. Can you picture a centimeter? How many? There are 10 million nanometers in there. Put it another way, 1 nanometer is 1/70,000th of a human hair, about 3 atoms in width. So you'd have to multiply that 70,000, 1 in 70,000 figure, by 3 to get the size of an atom. Atoms are tiny, but from atoms you can make molecules, and from molecules you can make essentially anything. All that's required, he said, is air, water, soil, and energy. Is, of course, of the Torah's basic elements of creation. But the littlest thing, an atom, is the building block of everything. Of course, we know there's subatomic particles as well, but let's not turn this into a science lecture. And a cell, little things. And of course, if a cell goes wrong, God forbid, that is, of course, leads to a terrible disease or terrible diseases. So little things are significant. And here was this little thing that I said 26, 30 years ago, not thinking, not anticipating, and indeed very surprised when Gideon told me this last Friday, that, repeating that Rashi had changed his life. I would never have selected that Rashi or expected that Rashi to have such a significant effect on a young man's life and make such changes. But that's because we ignore the little things, which is exactly the point that Rashi is making. The little things are big things in potential, in the wings, waiting to become big. That's why you've got to pay attention to them. They are critically important. Now, in that shir, which I'll be posting online, the one I gave in London, and maybe I said it here, I can't remember. I've been running around the world in the last 2 weeks. I arrived in Manchester, 2 days in Manchester, drove down to London, then went Tisha B'Av, and then Friday gave another shir, and then there was Shabbaton I mentioned to you. Then I flew back to New York, slept in my own bed for one night. My wife and I went to San Francisco, stayed in a place called Palo Alto for one night, an hour and a half journey south from San Francisco, and then we went to Los Angeles for a wedding, and then came back. So I'm completely, my body has no clue in which time zone it's in, and I'll probably fall asleep any second. So just switch off when I start snoring. But in the shir, I said the following thing. In the prayer that we say every day, 3 times a day, the prayer of the Shemona Esra, there is the part that's called Moedim. When you give thanks to God, and it says the following thing: we give thanks to God, we give thanks to you, God, and we will sing your praises for your life, for our lives that you've given from your hand to us, and our souls, which you've placed in our bodies, and for the miracles that are with us every day. So the question is, what miracles are with us every day? Now, whenever I say this to Ephraim audience, and you'll see that when I put up the shir from last Friday's shir to Rabbonim and to Chomim in Golders Green in London, what miracle, I said to them, happened to you last week? Like every day, the day had only just started. I think the shir was at 9 o'clock in the morning. So let's be a bit kinder to you. What miracles happened to you yesterday? Or last week, the whole of last week, let's spread it out. And I said to them, no, please don't be frum. It's a bit of cheek saying to a group of Rabbonim and Talmudic Kelm, don't be frum, obviously with tongue in cheek. Don't tell me, I woke up this morning. My heart was beating, my lungs expanded, blood was flowing around my bed. Yeah. I know that. And indeed, ultimately, that is a miracle, but that can't be what it's talking about here, because it already described that. I'll give you thanks and sing your praise, al chayinu, for the life that you gave us. So life, that's all the physical things. I can't be talking about that. It already addresses that. In fact, we're breathing. When it says the miracles are happening for us every day, it has to be talking about real miracles. So what real miracle happened to you today, or yesterday, or last week, or last year? Yeah, it's difficult though. So it didn't quite make sense. So I had an idea. And of course, the great thing about having your own idea is you feel really good about yourself until, which is dangerous. Gaiva is one of Judaism's biggest enemies. Ego. That's a brilliant insight, Rubenstein. So you're supposed to combat that. But a better way to combat that is to find out it's not your idea at all, and somebody said it long before you. And here we have, at the bottom of the Vilna Seder, exactly what the solution to feeling good about your own idea is, but somebody's already had it. So listen to this. You see, I'm saying is like this. There's a comma. For the miracles you did in my life, in all the Jewish people's life, that's with us all the time. We don't forget them. So listen what he says. And all the miracles that are happening to us and the kindness you do for us all the time. There is a mitzvah say, there's a positive mitzvah to remember chasod of the kindness of Hashem, and to consider them and to think about them. Shanema says in Devorim, remember the path that Hashem took you on, the 40 years in the desert, and give you miraculous food to eat, the manna, and your clothes didn't fall to pieces and deteriorate. How do you learn that from a Kal V'chomer? If you've got to remember all the incredible kindnesses that Hashem has done through the generations, the generation of the Midbar, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, etc., then Kal V'chomer Kol Shekin Shekol Echad Mitzral Chai V'Zachal Chassidim She'asa Tomid El Yisrael. Then, of course, we're supposed to remember all the miracles that Hashem has done with the Jewish people, and saved us from all our enemies, etc. Who were always trying to kill us. But Cain Chayav Kol Adam, and particularly a person is obliged Lazaka to remember, to recall all the chasodim, all the kindness, all the miracles Hashem has done for us from the day of our birth, so that we are connecting properly with God, and constantly we give thanks to Him. You got to remember all the little things, and it's interesting that with this Parshas Eikev that we mentioned before at the beginning, if you remember all the things, and if you don't forget, if you don't crush, if you don't discount the little things, you remember the little things, then all the blessings are going to flow from that. As the next pasuk goes on to say, then God will keep His part of the bargain as a chesed and the kindness as He promised to your fathers. And He says, I love you and I'll bless you. You'll have wonderful children, everyone's going to be fine. You'll have a beautiful land with beautiful fruit and beautiful food that will grow in its time, etc. And then in pasuk 18, it says, Lo sira mehem, when you get enemies, don't be afraid. Zocher tiskor. Remember what God's done for you in the past when He destroyed an Egyptian army, etc. You've got to remember the little things. You've got to remember the big things, but how much more have you had to work on remembering the little things? And that's maybe, Rashi doesn't say that explicitly. He says we forget the little things and we crush them between our feet. But then he goes on to say, remember, maybe there's a connection. Maybe he's saying, you know what it is that you forget? That you crush your feet. You crush beneath your feet the memory, the mitzvah to remember. And as he said, there is a mitzvah to remember. Right. So basically, if you look, I should have said, if you look a little bit further, and this is that's pasuk Zayin in Eikev, and pasuk Ches, and Perek Ches, and Yud Tes, just to make that explicit. And Yud Ches, what does it say? It's actually Yud Tes, sorry. So before we said, if you surely remember, double expression of Zocha, remembering. Here it's a double expression of forgetting. And if you forget your God, Hashem is Baruch, and you go to other gods, and then you're going to be in real trouble. So maybe it's not an idle suspicion that the thing that you're really in danger of crushing beneath your feet is the mitzvah of remembering and all the blessings that come from remembering. And forget, of course, that when you start to forget, Also, the curses come when Jewish people forget who and what they are. Now, this is a very, very important concept. There is a mitzvah of, there is a chesed, I should say. Hashem Yisbarach gives all of us that we forget. Because sometimes things happen to us in our lives which are so painful, but you have to forget. And indeed, the Yalkut Leon lawyers have the Yalkut Leon lawyers anymore left in England. So I made a photocopy of the shir. Listen to this. Hashem commands, when somebody loses somebody they have to sit shiva for, parent, child, sibling, wife, husband, Gimo Yomim Lebechi, the 3 days of crying. The Sheba Yomim Hesped, and 7 days, that's the Shiva, of recalling and mentioning the person, which is extremely therapeutic. Just saying the same story. New people come to the Shiva. What happened? Was he ill for a long time? Or Shloshim Yaim, the Kabbas of the and then there's 30 days after which you can cut your hair, shave if you're a man, etc. But Yosem Mishir Hazeh. But after 30 days, a person should not wallow in their pain, in their depression, in their sorrow. Because there is a natural healing that occurs as you move away from the event. And he's just traced what that is: 3 days of crying, 7 for the Shiva, 30 days, and then there's a year, and then there's a Yortzeit. Some people remain attached to that pain. They think that's a good thing to do. It's not a good thing to do. It's a chesed Hashem. Allowing yourself to allow time to wash over you means that it reduces the pain of the actual event. And that is therapy. And that is a kindness from God. However, as we've just seen, there's a danger to this. And the danger is that you start to forget the things you should remember. So in that mechanism that Hashem has created in every single human being, there is a wonderful therapy, wonderful therapeutic mechanism that we forget. It's not so intense. But because that mechanism is part of us, it can be used negatively as well, that we forget things that we need to remember and crush the memories beneath our heel. Yeah. So, in the Seder Gra and the Seder of the Vilna Gaon, he says a very interesting thing. In fact, I'm thinking of making the next series of Shirim, because we're coming to the end of the Shirim based on the Torah of Kelm. I'm thinking of making the next series of Shirim on the Seder. There's so much in the Seder, and we just tend to say the words without knowing what the words are. So I thought it might be nice to go through each of the prayers, maybe a Shachris, bring it to life. What's the major theme? And join them all together and see if there's a pattern emerging of an approach that should get us towards the Shema and eventually the Shemana Esrei. We're actually speaking to God, to Hashem face to face. So here there is a tremendously interesting. I found this very exciting when I saw it. This you'll find in our Chakras prayer. Of course, it's like most things from Tehillim. It's from Hoidel al Hashem Kira B'Shemai. So after Baruch Omar, if you use the Ashkenaz version, in Nusas Sephardic, we start with Hoidel or Hoidi. And it says the following thing: Yismechu Hashemaim b'Sogal Haaretz. Yismechu Hashemaim, Simcha. The heavens should have Simcha. B'Sogal Haaretz, and Sogal's word Nagila, Hava Nagila, the famous song Hava Nagila, means to be joyous, to be happy, and Simcha is also to be happy. But as I've told you many times in our Shirim, there are no such things as a synonym in Lashon HaKodesh, even though we might translate both of them as happy and accurately in English, but it's a type of happiness. What's the distinction between Simcha and Gila? And here he says, this is again the Vilna Gaon, tremendously interesting thing. He says that the difference between Simcha and Gila is Simcha is the joy and the happiness you feel when something new occurs. So a Simcha, let's say the birth of a child, and let's say the birth of a child who, this child's never been here before. Let's say the birth of a child and it's your first child. Now, if you had children, there is no comparison to the excitement you have when you have your first child, except perhaps like me, if you had 4 sons, then it was the same when you have your first daughter, because that's completely new. When something is new, a new Simcha, a new experience, that's the ultimate Simcha. But Nagila, That gila, that is a joy, and indeed it's happiness, but it's a happiness of something that's already taken place. So the fact that it's not new means it starts. That sort of like you start to forget the excitement and the passion you had when something was new. Therefore, we're starting to see a clue as to how we overcome the problem of not crushing the mitzvah to remember beneath our heels. So let me tell you something I do with my boys. I teach 2 classes in the week to Bochum and Yeshiva on public speaking, how to give shiurim, or how to speak in front of large audiences, how to control fear and engage your audience, eye contact, all this stuff. The second lesson in the course I teach is called the Perfect Presentation Course, which I teach to other people as well. You can see it on my Facebook page in case you are interested in learning how to speak to large audiences, something Jewish people have to do all the way through their lives, and do it well. So basically, I say to them after the second shiur, now I'd like you to go and find me a story, because a successful drosha always needs a story. After all, I'm telling you one now. And I want you to make sure that the story doesn't come from any of the books that people have read, Rabbi Crowan's books or whoever it is, nor is it to be, in videos that people can see from rabbis speaking. It has to be something which is completely new. And they all go, oh, we're going to get that. And the answer is, and it's a bracha within your own family. Go to your parents, whom you just look upon as your mother and your father. Go to your grandparents, particularly grandparents. And if you're really lucky to have great grandparents, ask them stories from their lives, and you'll find incredible stories. And that's exactly what it says in the Torah. The danger of forgetting and what happened in the past. So in Parshas Hazinu, it says the following thing. Remember the days of the world. And the years, and consider the years of each generation. Ask your father, they'll tell you about it. And your grandparents, and they'll tell you all about it. The way that you keep a memory fresh is to keep talking about it, to keep remembering it. That's what we do in our tefillos. But you have to, as it were, speak to people who can feed that freshness, to keep it going. I think one of the greatest, maybe, Rashi doesn't say this is my take on Rashi, but I think there's a hint, because it goes on to say, remember, so many times in the Torah it says, Moshe Rabbeinu, they're going to forget about the Torah, and warns them that the problem with Klal Yisrael and their journey through time is they forget who they are, and what their history is. The way that we remember it is by talking about it. We do that in shiurim, but we can talk about it to each other. And you've got to remember the big things, also the things that happen to you in your life. So if you have miracles that happen to you in your own family, talk to your family about it. Bring it up. There's a thing called a Sudas Adah. It's halacha. When you sit down, like when I was in a plane crash or when I was in a car crash, made a Sudas Adah. And you do it every year to remember. Klal Yisrael gets in trouble when we forget who we are. Make sure you take steps to remember. I wish you all a very good Shabbos.